Bronze Age collapse. Around 1200 BCE, several powerful civilizations across the eastern Mediterranean suddenly experienced enormous disruption. Cities were destroyed, kingdoms disappeared, trade networks collapsed, and populations migrated. The Hittite Empire fell, Mycenaean centers were abandoned, and Egypt recorded attacks by mysterious groups later called the Sea Peoples. Historians have proposed many possible causes, including drought, famine, earthquakes, warfare, political instability, and the breakdown of international trade. The most likely explanation may involve several disasters happening together rather than one single event. What makes the Bronze Age collapse so fascinating is how interconnected civilizations could suddenly lose stability across a huge region. Archaeologists continue discovering evidence, but the exact sequence of events remains uncertain. More than 3,000 years later, historians are still trying to understand what caused this extraordinary collapse. Roanoke Colony. In 1587, English settlers established a colony on Roanoke Island, off the coast of present-day North Carolina. Their governor, John White, eventually returned to England for supplies, expecting to come back quickly. However, war and other difficulties delayed his return for several years. When White finally arrived in 1590, the settlement had disappeared. There were no obvious bodies, destroyed buildings, or clear signs of a major battle. One of the most famous clues was the word Croton, carved into a wooden post. Historians have suggested that the colonists may have moved to another settlement, joined nearby indigenous communities, or died from disease, starvation, or conflict. Archaeological discoveries have produced possible clues, but no explanation has conclusively solved the mystery of the lost colony. Dark Ages. After the Western Roman Empire declined, parts of Europe experienced major political and economic changes. Some cities became smaller, long-distance trade decreased, political authority became fragmented, and fewer written records survived from certain regions. This period was later called the Dark Ages, although modern historians consider that label overly simplistic. The real mystery is how much remains unknown about everyday life during these centuries. Many documents were never produced, while others were destroyed, lost, or simply failed to survive. Archaeology has helped fill some gaps by revealing homes, burial sites, tools, weapons, and trade goods. However, there are still periods where historians know surprisingly little about ordinary people and local events. The absence of evidence does not mean nothing happened. It means much of the story may have disappeared with the records. Indus Valley Script. The Indus Valley Civilization created some of the ancient world's most sophisticated cities between roughly 2600 and 1900 BCE. Harappa, Mohenjo-Daro, and other settlements featured planned streets, drainage systems, standardized weights, and extensive trade networks. Yet one major mystery prevents historians from fully understanding this civilization. Its writing system remains undeciphered. Hundreds of inscriptions have been discovered on seals, pottery, tablets, and other objects, but most examples are extremely short. Researchers also lack a bilingual inscription comparable to the Rosetta Stone, making translation especially difficult. Without reading the script, historians cannot confidently determine many details about the civilization's government, religion, language, or political organization. The symbols may eventually be deciphered, but for now, an entire civilization continues to communicate with us through a writing system we still cannot understand. Library of Alexandria. The Library of Alexandria became one of the ancient world's most famous centers of scholarship. Scholars reportedly traveled there to study mathematics, astronomy, philosophy, medicine, literature, and other subjects. Yet the library's ultimate fate remains surprisingly uncertain. Popular stories claim that a single enormous fire destroyed the entire collection, but historians believe the reality was probably more complicated. The institution may have suffered from several fires, political conflicts, changing governments, financial difficulties, or gradual neglect over centuries. We also cannot determine exactly how many texts were stored there or how many were lost. The tragedy is not simply that a famous building disappeared. Countless ancient works may have vanished with it, meaning some ideas, discoveries, and stories are now permanently missing from humanity's historical record. Minoan civilization decline. The Minoans developed a sophisticated Bronze Age civilization centered on the island of Crete. Their palaces featured colorful artwork, complex architecture, storage systems, and surprisingly advanced water management. Around the 2nd millennium BCE, however, their civilization experienced major disruption. The enormous volcanic eruption on the nearby island of Thera likely caused earthquakes, tsunamis, and environmental damage across the region. But historians still debate how much the eruption contributed to the Minoans' decline. Mycenaean influence also increased during this period, suggesting political or military changes may have played an important role. Their writing system, known as Linear A, remains undeciphered, creating another major barrier to understanding their society. The Minoans clearly experienced a dramatic transformation, but the exact chain of events that ended their dominance remains uncertain. Missing years of Jesus. The historical record contains very little information about Jesus between his childhood and the beginning of his public ministry. The surviving gospel accounts describe aspects of his early life and later activities, but there is a substantial period for which there are no detailed contemporary records. This has led to centuries of speculation about where he lived, what work he performed, and whether he traveled to distant regions. Numerous theories have connected him with different places and traditions, but most lack reliable historical evidence. Historians generally avoid treating these later stories as established fact. The gap itself is not necessarily unusual because ancient biographies often focused on important public events rather than documenting every year of someone's life. Nevertheless, the missing period remains one of history's most famous unanswered biographical questions. Cahokia Collapse. Cahokia was one of the largest urban centers in ancient North America. Located near present-day St. Louis, it contained enormous earthen mounds, large plazas, residential areas, and evidence of extensive trade. At its height, around the 11th and 12th centuries, the surrounding population may have reached tens of thousands. Yet the city gradually declined and was largely abandoned centuries before European colonization. Researchers have proposed several explanations, including flooding, climate changes, deforestation, resource shortages, political instability, disease, and social conflict. No single theory has been universally accepted. Cahokia's decline is particularly important because it challenges outdated assumptions about pre-Columbian North America. The city demonstrates that complex urban societies existed on the continent long before European arrival, while its eventual abandonment leaves historians with a fascinating unanswered question. Sea peoples. Near the end of the Bronze Age, several powerful civilizations across the eastern Mediterranean experienced major disruption. Egyptian inscriptions describe battles against mysterious groups known collectively as the Sea Peoples. Pharaohs Merneptah and Ramesses III recorded conflicts involving these groups, but their true identity remains uncertain. They may have included migrants, pirates, displaced populations, mercenaries, or several different peoples grouped under one name. Some historians believe they played an important role in the collapse of Bronze Age kingdoms, while others argue that drought, famine, earthquakes, political instability, and economic breakdown were more important. Because most surviving descriptions were written by societies fighting them, we know very little about the Sea Peoples themselves. More than 3,000 years later, their origins and exact role remain one of ancient history's biggest mysteries. Lost historical records. Some of history's greatest mysteries exist simply because important records disappeared. Wars, fires, natural disasters, political upheavals, poor preservation, and the destruction of archives have erased countless documents from the past. This creates gaps where historians know that important events happened but cannot reconstruct exactly what occurred. Personal experiences are especially difficult to recover because ordinary people rarely left written record. Even when official documents survive, they often represent only the perspective of governments, rulers, or wealthy individuals. Archaeology can provide additional clues through buildings, artifacts, graves, and environmental evidence, but it cannot replace every lost document. As a result, parts of human history may remain permanently unknown. The most frustrating historical mystery may be realizing that the answers once existed, but the evidence disappeared before anyone could preserve it.